In this video, we're going to check out the Imalent MSO3. It advertises that it's 13,000 lumens, and it definitely delivers, easily incinerating that piece of paper within seconds. We're going to review this light by taking it to the trail, testing out the holster, taking it to the field, and running it through all our tests, including a drop test and water test. I'm going to break up this review into two parts, the briefing and then the pros and cons. At the end, we'll rate the lighting, user interface, and design out of 5 stars, and then we'll give it an overall rating. Here's 3 quick tables showing all the categories and all the ratings. You can see some of them are 0, so you'll definitely want to stay tuned to see why those got 0. So we'll start it off by looking at the most important thing, the lumen output. It starts off pretty strong, over 13,000 lumens, but it drops to 2,000 lumens in 35 seconds. The other lights with turbo drop down pretty quickly as well, like the EC01, DQG, and M3, but not as quickly as the MSO3, but that can be forgiven because it's putting out 14,000 lumens initially. And the X7R, being as big as it is, can maintain over 5,000 lumens for almost 5 minutes. When you're crossing the crosswalk, bump it up to turbo and let those 13,000 lumens illuminate your path, and you'll be highly visible to oncoming traffic. Here's a size comparison. It's pretty impressive that the MSO3 can output almost as much light as the X7R, and it's much smaller than that soda can sized light. It gets that massive output using a smooth reflector and 3 XHP 70.2s. It's 3 times the power output of the L6, which is way bigger, and its output towers above the rest of the everyday carries and utility lights. The reason I'm comparing it to these lights is because they're great bang for their buck, great features, output, good performing lights. So let's take these to the trail in the field and compare it all to the MSO3. With the 13,000 lumens and the wide distribution, it has no problem lighting up the path in front of you and your entire field of view, even up into the tips of the trees. It's very similar to the X7R, both of which completely outperform the L6, M3, EDC18, C8, IF25, M3 Pro, and EC01, all of which have a hard time lighting up the scene evenly and letting you see into the bushes like the MSO3. You can barely see anything, except if you're using the MSO3 or X7R. Here's the MSO3 on the beam intensity profile. You can easily see it's the greatest flutter out of all of them. And at the same time, it's a good thrower at 237 meters. Now let's take them all to the field and light it up. And you can see that throw performance at the field. The building's 100 meters away, and it lights it up decently so you can see the details on it. The flood performance is very good, lights up the grass all the way to the left and right, very similar to the X7R, which are both better than the L6, M3, EDC18, C8, IF25, M3 Pro, and EC01. Being the best flutter, it lights up the field evenly compared to the rest. I measured and calculated the throw to be 237 meters, which is better than these 3 utility lights, but with the small reflector, it can't throw the light out there as well as these lights with larger reflectors, which can push almost 300, 400, 500 meter throw distances. Being a floody light, it does work pretty well as a utility light, but having failed the water test, since some water got into the light switch and it stopped working, I don't think it's a good light for hiking because if it rains, it could make the light fail to operate properly. The rest of the light is sealed up pretty well, but that switch gets water into it and fails. Unfortunately, it also failed the drop test. The front ring is press fitted in there and it popped right out. It also only works with the battery it came with because it's a little bit long, but it is nice to have that USB-C charge port, which sits on the side of the battery instead of on the side of the flashlight. I kind of like that because it keeps the flashlight clean and you avoid having that rubber cap on the side of your flashlight that always gets caught on the side of your pants and opens up. The included high current battery actually performs pretty well and got 3,853 milliamp hours on my test. It doesn't give you as much capacity as the Tesla cell or the LG cell, which gets closer to 5,000 milliamp hours, but it runs much cooler, which means it has lower internal resistance and is capable of outputting way more amps, and is a true high drain battery. You'll see that I put a piece of tape around the battery at that spot. That's where the body tube changes diameter and it's actually kind of sharp and it'll damage the insulation or the wrapping on the battery. So if you want to protect it, wrap that part with some electrical tape or something to protect it. I guess that's another poor design choice that brings down the score of this flashlight. One thing of concern is that the battery states on it don't heat it above 60 degrees Celsius or 172 degrees Fahrenheit. 172 degrees Fahrenheit is actually 78 degrees Celsius. So I hope that the Fahrenheit figure is correct and not the Celsius, because the flashlight actually goes above 60 degrees Celsius up to 69. The user interface is pretty simple. It goes to turbo with a double click, but you can't get back to a memory mode from turbo, which is weird. I like to be able to do that, so I hope they add it in a future revision. Another really bad thing about turbo is it only works when my battery is at 3.8 volts or above. As soon as it goes below 3.8 volts, you can't get into turbo anymore unless you unscrew the tail cap and screw it back in. It has a flicker index of 0.5, which is pretty bad, but that's the trade-off to reduce circuitry and make it as small as all the other lights, but still be able to put out 13,000 or 15,000 lumens initially. So definitely not a bad light overall, but it has some quirks to watch out for, and we'll go into those in detail during the rest of the review. Before I jump into the pros and cons, I want to thank all my subscribers and patrons. Your encouragement and support definitely help this channel, and hope to keep bringing you fun and entertaining content. So now let's go into the pros of this light. It's definitely the high output, and just keep in mind that 15,000 lumens is a freshly charged battery, brand new. So after you've used this light for a little bit, you can expect about 13,000 lumens for 5 seconds. And as you can see, it drops down pretty quickly to about 2,000 lumens in 35 seconds. And it starts to get pretty hot, and you'll be barely able to hold it after about a minute or so. After going from turbo, it drops down to about 1500 lumens, 1000 lumens, and then it turns off at about 74 minutes. The build quality is actually pretty high. It's the QA/QC and some of the design flaws that cause it to fail the drop test and the water test. They've used some high quality components in here like the Texas Instruments boost converter. They've got 3 of those on there, and as you can see they push out 10 amps each and can work down to 2.7 volts. And that's what they use to boost it up to 6 volts for each LED. And the side switch is built strong, it's just missing a seal to keep out the water. And the machining is pretty good. It's also pretty handy that they have a USB-C port on the 21700. You can charge it up at over 1 amp, which takes about 2.5 to 3 hours to fully charge. It does have advanced temperature regulation and kicks in at 55 degrees, reduces the output, but it still ends up getting to about 69 degrees Celsius or 156 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty hot. It has lockout and it's pretty quick to unlock it when you take it out. 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000, 5 1000. So it takes about 5 seconds to draw your flashlight and power it up. It also has a nice little indicator light, which I like because if I leave it on the nightstand, I want to be able to grab it and turn it on. Make sure it's charged because it only lasts 80 days. I'm going to quickly show you the holster. Velcroed, and it's spring fitted, so there's an elastic here. And it holds the flashlight pretty well. It's a high quality holster. Now let's get into the cons of the light. It completely failed the water test. As soon as water got into that tactile switch, it operated by itself and wouldn't operate when I pressed it. So avoid this light if you need water resistance. Next major fail is the impact resistance. The front ring is popped in there, so as soon as you drop it, it pops right out. And then the next one is the major fail, which is the low voltage control. It kicks in way too soon, and actually my light and many other people's lights were delivered defective, where it went into low voltage cutoff right at 4.2 volts. It was because there's thread lock there, and you had to clean that up to make it work. Even after cleaning it up, some people's lights wouldn't work, so you gotta be careful. I would consider ordering it from Amazon, so if there's a defect, you can send it back right away. In this diagram, I show you all the points that I cleaned to make it so it wouldn't go into low voltage cutoff prematurely. So I think the major issue is that the system resistance is way too high. The flashlight runs at 26 amps, and when you have a voltage drop of 1.2 volts, the driver's going to see 3 volts even though the battery's at 4.2 volts. So then it's going to lock you out of turbo until you unscrew the tail cap and screw it back in. I've made a quick video on how to clean up those contacts to make it work better, and I used Deoxit to clean those contacts since it works for flashlights and any other electronics. So after reducing the resistance, I've gotten my voltage drop to about 0.8, so now the red light won't come on until about 3.8 volts. So as you can see, it doesn't address the root of the problem, which is a low voltage cutoff. I would make it an unlatching low voltage cutoff, and I'd readjust the voltages as shown here. Immolent seems like a pretty good company, so I've given them my suggestions. Hopefully they can improve future revisions. So that's a quirk we'll have to live with until that happens. I was also thinking that we can run a bypass wire to the controller, but I'll do that in a future mod video, and hopefully that'll fix it. So like I said before, my flashlight arrived with thread lock all over the driver. I had to open it up and clean that all out, otherwise the low voltage cutoff kicked in way too soon. The price is a little steep, but if you want the high output, then it makes sense. The output is right up there with the X7R, and that's why it costs so much more than all the other lights. In my opinion, the temperature is set a little bit too high, and unfortunately you can't program it yourself like the EC01 or the other lights. Another big downfall to it is there's no moonlight mode, so if you take it out stargazing, you won't really be able to use this light at all. It'll ruin your night vision. I think they simplified the user interface too much, and anytime I use turbo I have to turn off the flashlight before going back to medium mode, which is annoying because you leave yourself in the dark for a split second. The timing between all the modes is a little bit too long, and it takes you forever to go back to high if you accidentally jump to low. Then you have to go all the way back to high again, so that's also annoying. And then the last con is that you have to use the proprietary battery, which is 75.8mm long, but that's the nature of having a USB-C port on the top of it. It's still a pretty good battery. So now let's check out its ratings. Lighting has 13 different categories, and out of those we give it 4.3 because it lights up the trail and the field pretty well. and has excellent output. Here's a comparison of the beam shots. You can see the MSO3 in the middle, and has great beam uniformity, and there's very little color shift compared to all the other lights. A lot of them have pretty bad color shift. For the user interface, we gave it only 3.0 because you got no moonlight mode, the turbo can't go back to medium mode, and the gaps are too long between the medium modes. For design, we have 11 categories, and it got 2.5, which is pretty poor. Main reason being the water ingress into the switch, the low voltage cutoff issue, the QA/QC issues, and the impact resistance. That front ring shouldn't be a press-on, it should be threaded in so it doesn't pop out when you drop it. And the tail also takes 8 rotations to remove instead of the normal 4. The side clip is also pretty useless. It's flimsy and doesn't really help hold the flashlight in place. They should also included a tail magnet. It'd make the flashlight much more useful. So there's definitely room for improvement in the design, but even so, I think they've done a pretty good job getting 13,000 lumens into such a small compact package. Everything is stuffed in there as tight as you can, and those electronics are very low profile. That is no small feat. For those electronics to be able to boost up the voltage and produce 120 watts of light, that's pretty impressive. So the overall rating for this flashlight is 3.4. which is not bad considering its design flaws. Its saving grace was its excellent lighting performance, which got 4.3 stars. Now I'll just briefly go over some of those categories and talk about why it lost some points and got that overall rating. Here's a quick look at the first table out of 3. You'll see 0 ratings for the water and impact resistance, so that's what really dropped it down. You can pause it and take a detailed look at this table if you like. Here's the second table, and it really lost some points at 2.5 for teardown and pulse width modulation because it flickered so much and that front ring pops right off. And here's the third page. It got 0 for low battery protection because that red light just keeps coming on and it's pretty hard to fix. But it should be noted that the flashlight turns itself off at 2.9 volts, so it does save the battery. For customizability and modifications, it got 1 because it uses all that glue in there and you can't really take it apart easily to modify it. If they had used threads and O-rings, so you can easily unscrew everything, that would have been good. The driver is also glued in there, it's not threaded in there or fastened somehow. I rated intended purpose at 2.5 because if you're going to go hiking with this thing, it's going to rain, and that side switch is going to fail and the flashlight's not going to work properly. So it does get merit for being the most powerful everyday carry, and it fulfills that function, which is great to have when you're hiking and going on walks. But if you're caught in the rain, it's not going to work. So it doesn't fulfill its intended purpose very well as an everyday carry. So after achieving a rating for each category, we averaged all the scores and it got a final rating of 3.4 stars out of 5. So not the best score, but if you want a pocket rocket with 13,000 lumens right off the bat, then this is definitely the light for you. Comes at a premium, has some QA/QC issues, so I definitely recommend purchasing this from Amazon, and if you have any issues, they can take care of it. If you order this from other sources, it may be harder to RMA or get a warranty fix. So again, thank you to all my subscribers and patrons. As some of you have suggested, I've created the Patreon page and added some digital downloads of the graphs and some behind the scenes. It's in early development, so I don't have much on there. Keep all the suggestions coming, as they definitely help me out. Thanks for watching, and I hope that helps.